Great. Welcome everybody. Bruchim Abayim. Thank you for joining us. So tonight we're starting a two-part series on Chanukah, which is starting, God willing, next week, the 25th of Kislev, which falls, I think, Thursday night, God willing, next week. So we're going to do a two-part series. And a two-part series is very appropriate because tonight, God willing, we're going to look at the problem. What was the main crux of the problem between the Greeks and the Jewish people? And it's not such a simple answer. Sometimes answers come simply and easily, and sometimes they get a little bit more complex. Sometimes when anti-Semites come to hurt us, it's clear. They tell us they hate us, they want to destroy us, they want to hurt us. Very much like the Purim story, Megillat Esther, we knew exactly what we were dealing with and how we were going to deal with them. I mean, it came with a lot of danger and difficulty, but the Purim story has a certain diametric to it that is clear. The Chanukah story, however, is not so clear. Purim is Jew versus Amalek, this nation that wants to destroy us, physically wipe us out. The classic archetypal anti-Semite. Chanukah, the lines aren't drawn so clearly. They're not drawn clearly, my friends, as to who we're fighting precisely, how we're going to retaliate, and what the solution to the problem actually is. So next week we'll be looking at the menorah, which is going to be the answer, the antidote to the problem of who the Yevanim, who the Greeks were. That's going to be the answer. Today, we got to figure out what the question is. What exactly was the problem with the Yavanim, with the Greeks? So the Jewish people at this point in history were living in Israel. And we had rebuilt our temple in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, on Har HaBayit. And things were looking good. We'd got through the exile of Purim. We'd lived, many of us, in Persia, which was the epicenter of power in its day, and we had miraculously survived, and a large group of Jews had returned to the land of Israel. About 30 to 33% is the assumed percentage of Jews that had gone back, and in the Jewish year 3408, which corresponds to 353 BCE, something amazing happened. What happened was the temple was rebuilt and Ezra was the leader of the Jewish people, and we had a glory that had been lost with the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, and yet here we were in the land of Israel. However, what was about to happen was something that the Jewish people did not anticipate. And we know that the Jewish people have gone through 4 exiles. Daled Galiot. We've spoken about those 4 exiles before. They are the 4 angels that Jacob saw ascending and descending the ladder on Har HaBayit, on the future makom of the temple. He saw 4 angels. Each one of these angels represented a different galut, a different exile that our ancestors went through. My friends, Chanukah is the 3rd of the 4th exile, but it's very unusual. Because exile, galut, can come in 2 forms. One is a geographical exile, that the Jewish people are safe in their home, in Eretz Yisrael, even with a temple. And that's what we were at this time of history, because we said the temple, second temple, was rebuilt in the year 353 BCE. And yet, the Greeks started to take over the region. I'm going to talk about how that began and how the beginnings actually looked pretty good and pretty comfortable for us and for them. There was a meeting of the minds. However, within a short amount of time, we'll see in a moment, with the death of Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedonia, things started to get bad as his empire that he had conquered was divided into 4 sections. And eventually, after a few hundred years, Antiochus IV, in the year 165 BCE, made a conquest of the temple and desecrated it and defiled it, as we know. And a few years later, we have the rule of the Hashmonaim, and they were the Kohanim, the priests, who were in charge of the temple, who were not warmongers, were not warriors in any way, shape or form. Yet they decided, and we'll see next week why so much, they were the ones who had to step up and push this Greek force out of the temple, out of Jerusalem. And so exile can be geographical in nature, but that is not this exile. This Greek exile, my friends, which started well and looked very promising for the Jewish people, considering there was a foreign force that was occupying Jewish land of Israel and eventually Jerusalem. And yet, very soon, the exile began. And the exile was not geographical, it was spiritual. Galut exile can come in two forms, we said, where the Jewish people are thrown out of the land of Israel, out of our homeland, the land that was promised to our forefathers and foremothers, and that we worked hard to keep and hold on to. And yet we were in Israel, and the exile must have been different, because it is called a galut. It's called the Greek exile. And very, very quickly, this exile led to the Jewish people being spiritually disconnected from their rightful land of Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, and even more specifically, the temple that we had rebuilt just a few hundred years before. So what exactly is Chanukah? Who are these Greeks, and why did they give us so much trouble? What was the problem of the Greek nation that when they took over the land of Israel, the following happened? Says the Gemara, my Chanukah, what exactly is this whole Chanukah story? What are we celebrating when we celebrate the holiday of Chanukah? And the Gemara gives us a very short biographical view and says, when the Greeks entered into the Heichal, into the holy sanctuary in Jerusalem on Temple Mount, all of the oil that was there, that was used in the menorah, in the candelabra, the 7-branch candelabra that was there, they defiled all of this oil. Eventually, says the Gemara, the Hashmonaim, these were the Jewish family who were Kohanim priests and had a tremendously important power of control in the temple in Jerusalem. They managed somehow, we'll see next week, miraculously, to push out these Greek army out of the temple and out of major parts of Jerusalem. And they looked around, says the Gemara, and they managed to find one flask of oil that had the stamp of the high priest of the Kohen Gadol. It was enough for one day, and miraculously, it lasted for 8 days, as we all know. This miracle occurred. The nature of the miracle we'll see next week. It's not as simple as you think. And they lit that menorah. The lighting of that menorah was a sign. It was a sign that they had vanquished, that they had taken over the rightful temple that belonged to us, the Jewish people. And the following year, the sages established these 8 days of Chanukah for praise, for Hallel, and for Hoda'ah, for giving thanks. That, says the Gemara, is basically what Chanukah is all about. Now, it's not so easy to understand what the problem was. I mean, we've been attacked by anti-Semites many, many times. The Greeks came, before them the Babylonians, after them the Assyrians, and we're going to have the Romans a little bit later. And yet, seemingly, we create an entire new holiday. And make no mistake, making a new Jewish holiday that the entire Jewish people, wherever they are going to keep is a big deal. It's not so simple. There's something going on over here, my friends, that must be very, very deep and very central to who we are as the Jewish people, that the rabbis decided to turn what happened on those few days on Temple Mount in Jerusalem as such an epic event that in a new holiday where we say Hallel with a bracha, which is a big deal, for 8 days, it must be something very big. And a mitzvah of lighting a menorah is established as well. A rabbinic mitzvah, but a mitzvah nonetheless. And the Rambam gives us a little more of a glimpse into what is going on that we celebrate this holiday. And he says, like we know from the Gemara, it happened in the days of the Second Temple, B'Beit Sheni, Kishemalchu Yavan, that the Greeks were taking over control of the land of Israel. Gazru Gezeret al Israel, they made decrees against our people. And they attempted to destroy our entire religion. So now we're getting a little bit more. This wasn't just a territorial claim. I mean, it can't be. The fact that they didn't just attack Jews and take over their houses and threaten to kill them, but instead made a beeline for the temple, means there's something else going on over here. And the fact that of all the things they wanted to destroy and defile, the menorah, the light of the Jewish people, is what they wanted to darken and they wanted to extinguish. Something, my friends, something is going on over here, something very deep. And they instituted decrees against us, and they didn't allow us to study Torah or do mitzvot, which, of course, is one of the first things that anti-Semites try to do to us. They ban Torah study, they ban mitzvahs observance, and we'll see 3 particular mitzvot they picked on, mitzvot that have kept us going for this long. They took our money, and they took and defiled our holy Jewish daughters. They entered into the temple, and they defiled it, and they took away the purity that was the temple, which was given off by the light of the menorah, until the God of Israel came, had pity upon us, and saved us. So the Rama very quickly ascribes the victory to God and to his mercy upon us. Who are these Greeks, and what's the big deal? I mean, we like Greek culture. Much of what we do, my friends, much of how we live actually comes and stems from Greek thinking, Greek understanding, Greek beauty of values and science and architecture, democracy. Some of the greatest ideas come from Greece, and we can't just summarize Greece and Greek thinking into one sentence. That would be as naive and as pointless as trying to take all of Judaism and put it onto a bumper sticker. I mean, you can try, but you're doing it a disservice. But there is one aspect of Greece. There's one aspect of Greek thought that really started to act as a problem between the rabbis and the Jews of the day and the Greek scholars, which eventually ended up as becoming a war. But before it was a physical war, my friends, it was a war of mind, of Athens versus Jerusalem, of Greek against Jew. And what was that? It wasn't binary. There was something that was troubling us, the Jewish people. And that was, although there was tremendous beauty in Greek thinking and Greek ideas, actually, I'll tell you a wild piece of information the Gemara tells us. Rabbi Gamliel says that you can translate the Torah into one language and one language only, and that is into Greek. If you want to translate scriptures, no language can capture the beauty of the Torah, which of course was given to us and written to us only in Hebrew and Lashon Kodesh. Says Rabbi Gamliel, Greek, that's okay. If you want to take the Torah and give it another form of expression, another way of developing and understanding, you should use Greek. Because Greek is such a deep and beautiful language, it can capture the beauty and the nuances that is Judaism. So they gave us a lot of great things: understanding, writing, thinking, philosophy. So where did it all fall apart? I mean, this is before the war. The war was just the physical manifestation of an ideological battle that came between 2 great worlds, says Winston Churchill. No one has done more to influence the world than Jerusalem and Athens, Greek thinking and Jewish Torah thinking. So where did it go wrong? That even the Torah, according to us, can be translated into Greek and understood and appreciated and loved and loved through Greek language and culture and form and understanding. The problem, my friends, and this is really what it's going to become down to, is that the difference isn't one of rejection over here. It is one of qualification. And that is the Greek ideology, or Hellenistic, to be more specific, more accurate of what we're really dealing with. The Hellenistic view is that if you can measure it, if you can formulate a theory around it, if you can understand it, we want it. We want to bring that into the world. That's the world of Greece, and that is a world the Jewish people loved and appreciated. But it stopped, my friends. There was a roof to Greek understanding, because once we enter the realm of the supernatural, once we enter the realm of God, of godliness, of spirituality, of something more than just trying to measure and understand everything, once you're into that world, the Greeks had no interest, and they wanted to quash that. There was no idea of anything that was beyond. If it's understood and measured, it's good. If it's beyond physical understanding and measurement, we want nothing to do with it, said the Greeks. And the Jewish people were like, we'll see beauty in Greek thought and culture and philosophy. I mean, even the Ramban Maimonides describes Aristotle in his writings as an absolute genius, almost the level of a Navi, of a prophet. But there is a point where it just stopped working. And that is when it came to understanding and appreciating the beauty of finding meaning and value in a higher purpose, in a spiritual world, in a world that is beyond this world, because this world is finite and human understanding is finite. But we, the Jewish people, have a Torah, and that Torah comes from God, and God is infinite. And so what ended up becoming a big battle of physicality between us, my friends, didn't start that way. It started when Alexander of Macedonia, the great Greek leader from Macedonia who entered into Israel, and the Samaritans of his day, a group that had created a cult that was against the Jewish people, against Torah, and against definitely the ownership of the Jewish people, of Jerusalem and the temple. And these Samaritans managed to make a beeline for Alexander, realizing he was an extremely powerful and brilliant genius of an individual. The Gemara speaks in very glowing terms of this individual. And so does Jewish historians. Josephus and the Gemara speaks very highly of him. Actually, there was a minhag for 1 year in thanks to Alexander the Great, after the story I'm about to tell you, that every Jewish child that was born for 1 year was given the name Alexander. When you meet someone today, a Jewish boy, with the name Alexander or Alex, or even maybe passed on to a Jewish girl, nowadays you see an Alex both ways. There's Alexandra, right? You can well assume that going back, that great-great-great-grandfather of that child you see today with that name actually received that name on the year that every Jewish baby was given the name Alexander, in honor of Alexander of Macedonia, Alexander the Great. And so he came to Jerusalem, and the Samaritans said, these Jews, they want to hurt you, and they want to take away your wisdom, and they want to give you trouble. Destroy and take over the temple and give it to us, the Samaritans. We'll turn it into what you want it to be, Alexander. And Simon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, the priest of the day, he heard about this, and he donned his royal Kohen priestly garments, his big day kahuna. He put them on, and he made his way on the 25th of Tevet to Mount Gerizim. This was one of the mountains in Jerusalem that has historical and biblical significance. And that is where the tribe, the encampment of Alexander the Great had positioned themselves. And Josephus tells us that the Jewish people, under the leadership of Simon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, who was wearing in all his splendor the garments and holding up a fiery torch, and made his way all night. They walked all night until at dawn they arrived to see the encampment. And on one side were the Samaritans, and on the other side were the Jewish people. And Alexander the Great turned to the Samaritans and said, "Who are these people?" And the Samaritans spoke bad against the Jews and said, "They're the ones who rebelled against you. They want nothing to do with you." And the Jewish people, under the leadership of Simon the righteous, Shimon Tzaddik, started to make their way closer and closer to Alexander the Great. And as soon as Alexander the Great saw Shimon Tzaddik, Simon the righteous, he got off his horse and he bowed down to him. And all of his followers says, "You, a great king Alexander, you bow down to this rabbi dressed in his big day in his priestly garments?" And he said to them, "Let me tell you something. I have been misled by the Samaritans. This face of Shimon Tzaddik, of Simon the righteous, every time I'm about to go into battle, an image comes to me. It comes to me in my dreams. And I never knew the face, who that face in that image was, who it belonged to. But I knew that whenever I saw that face, I was going to be successful in battle. This is the face of success in my life." And as soon as I saw this man, I knew this was the face that I saw every single time that I went into battle. And that is why I'm bowing down. And Shimon Tzaddik built a relationship as to the Jewish people. And Alexander the Great became one of the great friends of the Jewish people in his day. And while he conquered a vast amount, a whole swathe of land throughout the Middle East, unfortunately, very, very quickly, after he died at a very young age, others took over. And as we said before, Antiochus IV took over the land of Israel and did not appreciate the Jewish scholarship. Because for him, if you could see it and understand it and appreciate it, it was not for us. So now the Greeks and the Jews were at war, which started ideologically, eventually started to frustrate the Greeks, because although they loved our Torah and they appreciated the Bible, and actually King Ptolemy had taken 72 sages and made them translate the Bible into Greek, and miraculously they all came out with exactly the same Greek translation. For them, the Torah was just another book. There are plenty of books of philosophy. There were Greek philosophers who were walking around in their togas, enjoying understanding and appreciating culture and history and philosophy of many nations. They had taken our Torah and they had extinguished the spiritual light that the Torah had represented for the Jewish people for hundreds and hundreds of years. The Greeks, however, in their search for knowledge and their defiling of our Torah, very quickly turned into a physical battle. And that started with decrees against the Jewish people. And these decrees came in a few forms. They made a decree, just like the Persians before them. Now remember, the Persians wanted to kill us physically. There was no ideological battle. There was no God, and there was God, and those who believed in God should be wiped out and destroyed. That, my friends, was the Purim story that preceded this, and that's pretty much how it went. But this story was much deeper, because while there were Jews versus Greeks, there were also Jews versus Jews as well, because the Greek way of thinking and understanding held a great attraction to many Jewish people. So there wasn't just a battle of A against B, Athens versus Greek. There's more like a triangle. There was Jews, there was Greeks, and then there were Greek Jews. And those Greek Jews, sometimes as we describe them as, were our own worst enemies, because the Jewish people started to revile their own nation. I know it's hard to believe, their own Torah and their own mitzvot. And they started to assist the Greeks in imposing decrees against the Jewish people. And the Greeks chose 3 mitzvot, just like the Persians before them. And they said that it was forbidden to keep Shabbat. It was forbidden to keep Rosh Chodesh, and forbidden to give a Brit Milah. Sounds familiar, right? 2 of them sound very familiar. Shabbat. As someone once said, more than the Greek Jews keep Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. And so when you want to attack Jewish people, when you want to disconnect us from our Torah, from our connection to God, to emanate our faith, and to our land and our people and our families, stop Shabbat. That makes sense. Brit Milah, that makes sense as well. Entering into the covenant of Abraham, bringing a young Jewish boy, which is the mitzvah of both parents, to bring their young 8-day-old son for circumcision. The Greeks had a big problem with that. They saw the human body as perfect, as complete. Who are you Jews to take this brand new baby and to deform it, to take away a piece of skin from this perfect form? They had a big problem with that as well. Of course, we the Jewish people say, it's a sign. It's a sign that we are made great, but there's always room for improvement. And this taking of this little surplus, of this little extra piece of skin, is a symbol of how we're going to, first of all, work on that area of intimacy, and also how there is room for improvement. And from the very earliest days of a Jewish child, the parents come together and bring their young child into the covenant of Abraham, into the covenant of spirituality and Judaism on the 8th day. More about the number 8 next week. But Rosh Chodesh? Why would they pick on Rosh Chodesh? What's the big deal? Once a month, when the moon starts to renew itself, when the month restarts, they banned us connecting to that day of sending out witnesses to see the new moon and to begin the calendar month again. Now, with that comes a few problems, because once you give up on figuring out when the month begins, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to figure out when the Jewish holidays begin. So once you abandon Rosh Chodesh and forbid the sending of messages on Rosh Chodesh to know the new moon has arrived, you've pretty much gotten rid of most of the Jewish holidays, which we have to figure out according to their arrival in the Jewish month. But there's something deep here, my friends. And that is, one of the reasons the Jewish people have survived for millennia is that no matter how difficult and challenging life becomes, and there have been many, many anti-Semites who've come against us and worked against us, and they brought pogroms and crusades and holocausts and genocides and exiles. And yet, the Jewish people have looked at that moon that waxes and wanes every single month and said, we, the Jewish people, have the ability to renew ourselves. We are the moon people. We base our entire fundamental attachment to every Jewish holiday based upon the moon. As the moon goes away and we are lesser, we know, don't worry. In just 30 days or so, we are going to be able to renew ourselves and be chadash, new, like the moon. So their attacking of Rosh Chodesh wasn't just to make us abandon the Jewish holidays, it was that as well. It was also to take away our spirit of survival in the darkest and most difficult times. And there wasn't a darker time for the Jewish people than this Greek exile. Because although the Jewish people were in Israel and had control of the lot of the land of Israel, these Greeks came in. At first it was good, like every exile, it works out well. But then very quickly, when they want to detach us from the God of Israel, when they want to detach us and pull us away from Torah and from mitzvot, very quickly, because they want to take full control over us ideologically, and when we don't give in, that's when the war begins. And that's, my friends, the big problem that the Jewish people had with the Greeks. We appreciate your thinking and understanding, and we love your philosophy, and we love your government, and we love your buildings and your art. But at some point, my friends, the Jewish people stand up like their great-great ancestor Abraham and say, it just can't be idols. There's got to be more about life. And the Greeks removed all forms of meaning from the Jewish people. They took the Torah and made it into another mundane document. Something that you studied before, saw no meaning in, no sacrifice, no beauty, no spirituality. That, my friends, is why the Greeks made a beeline for the temple. Because for us, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem represented the light of spirituality. And on that mountain, King David decided that a temple would be built, and his son, King Solomon, was the one who merited to build that temple, and he built windows in that temple. And the windows in the temple were inverted, because usually light was captured from the outside and brought into a home or a building, and yet the temple was built back to front, where the windows actually were built in such a way, through an inverted fashion, that the light from inside went out. That light wasn't there to light up the streets, it was there to bring spiritual light to the Jewish people. And this light was very important at all times and all ages, but very extremely important at the times of the Greeks. Because the Greeks wanted to extinguish the spiritual light of the Jewish people. And that, my friends, is why the Greeks, with the help of many Jews, unfortunately, I know it's hard to believe that Jewish people would want to extinguish the light of Jewish spirituality, Jewish continuity, real spiritual Jewish learning. But they went into the temple because they said, if we can extinguish the emotional, spiritual, psychological light of the menorah of the temple, we will be able to control these people. Take away their precious mitzvot that attached them to the God of Israel. Remove everything that is holy, that is kadosh, defile it. Then we have won. We've done our job. So we don't want to kill you, Jews. We want to take over your temple. We want to show you that that which is holy is not holy. That which is sacred and special and apart is not. And the word for Jerusalem is Zion. And that comes from the word Mitsuyan, which means remarkable. For us, our attachment to Torah and Jewish history and Jewish survival is full of meaning and value and appreciation. Once you strip that off and we become just another nation, just as some call us, a nomadic people that have happened to survive millennia, you have removed everything that is Israel, everything that is Jerusalem. So the Greek battle was not one of knowledge, but one of value, of meaning, and, my friends, of significance. The core conflict is an ideological one of a spiritual nature, and nothing was clearer. And by the way, that should help us to start to understand why of all the people in Israel, of all the Jews, the group that came forward to fight this physical battle were the ones who were actually spearheading the ideological battle, and that is the priests. Now, I know in the image that most people see of the Jewish people and the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, and of Yehuda HaMaccabee, right, the family of Maccabee, led by Judah. When I was a kid, we used to have these comics, and he was all ripped, right, with his jar of oil in his hand and sword in his back. They were a bunch of puny people. That's what they were. They were priests. They didn't have land. They didn't work the land. They were in charge of the temple and its environs. The Greeks were fighting a group of Talmud scholars. Now, if you've ever seen a Talmud scholar sitting in the yeshiva, it's not much of a Mr. Universe competition, right? Usually a bunch of puny individuals who may get a little bit of exercise in the afternoon, right? But that's just there to keep their bodies going so they can study more. There are strong, powerful Jewish people, thank God, but that's not who these people were. These were a band of scholars. And the reason they were the ones who stood up to take on this battle was to prove that this isn't a battle of might. It's a battle of correct sight, of seeing, of understanding. And so when the Maccabees stood up and they said, we are going to take this battle, and we, a small band, are going to take on an entire Greek army of elephants and horses, wherever they were, and chariots and swords. But we have to be the ones to do this, because when we win this battle, we're going to show you that in essence, we're not interested in fighting. We're not a band of warriors. We are a people that want to see spirituality invested in our people, in our land, and in our temple. And that's why it was this small band of 5 brothers, right, who managed to gain a little bit of support, who were able miraculously, and the battle takes on more miraculous image and impression when you realize that this was just a small band of Torah scholars who managed to hold off an entire Greek army that had taken over all of Judea, all of Israel of its day. So we know that this battle took on a physical form, but my friends, it was deeper and more powerful. And so this was the problem. The Greeks had taken over Israel. They had ideologically taken over many, many Jewish people who were living in the land of Israel. They eventually started to make decrees against us. And this culminated with such a frustration and anger that they took over the temple and they defiled it. And they brought a pig into there. And they brought zoners and prostitutes in there as well in order to make a vision. And they made it into a gymnasium and said there is no holiness among the Jewish people. And they even made the Jewish people inscribe on the horns of their oxen that the Jewish people have no connection to the land of Israel. Why would they do that? Why would they make us etch onto the horn of our cows that we, the Jewish people, have no connection to the God of Israel? One opinion is because that was the car of its day. Basically, they made us advertise and put bumper stickers onto every single animal that we use for physical work, that we're disconnected. The Greeks were masters of advertising. But don't worry, we'll see next week the Jewish people had a very good retaliation and started to advertise our comeback with fire and light. We'll see that next week. And also because they used to use these horns, they would remove them and use them actually to fill up with milk and feed their babies. And so they wanted to tell the Jewish people that from your very earliest years, we're going to disconnect you from all spirituality. So although there were physical decrees against us, and although there was a lot going on that we appreciated among the thinking and the philosophy of Greek, the Hellenistic specifically view of the world, that we have full control, understanding, and if we don't, it doesn't exist, was an anathema for the Jewish people. It went against everything the Jewish people have stood for hundreds and thousands of years. Because for us, any understanding, any appreciation of life, the universe, every physical beauty in this world is always there to lift us up and bring us closer to God, to the spiritual world. And when we build beautiful homes, that's going to bring us closer to God because we're going to use it for spiritual meaning and value. And when we build businesses and when we read books, we use it to bring us closer to God. And when we have our meals and when we eat, we invest God into every single part of that meal. For us, Jewish life, Jewish history, Jewish family is pregnant with connection to a higher spiritual value. If you take that away from us, you're removing everything that we are. And so, my friends, that, in a nutshell, is the problem the Jews had with the Greeks. Not they wanted to kill us and then we won, let's celebrate. It wasn't about that. This war was all about the oil. And we're going to visit next week, God willing, we'll continue this story to figure out why this whole story is actually going to be represented in one candelabra. The 7-wicked menorah that stood in the temple, the light that could be shone out, really represented everything that we were, everything that we represent, everything the Greeks hated about us, and the miraculous nature by which the open miracles that happened in those days of the menorah and the war, the physical war with the Greeks, and the fact that this small band of weak Jews were able to conquer this vast Greek army, all of that is going to be a sign every single year for 8 days that we are going to relive and celebrate and bring out as being the secret to the survival of the Jewish people for thousands of years. We're going to stop over there. We'll pick this up, God willing, next week when we specifically visit the oil, the menorah, and the flickering light of the menorah. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll see you all, God willing, next week. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.